My name's Grant Holloway, and if you'd asked me 3 years ago where I thought I'd be by now, I wouldn't have said trailer living farmer with calloused hands and no marriage left to speak of. But life's funny like that. It doesn't ask you. It just shifts, splits, and sometimes shatters before slowly offering you something unexpected. When the divorce was finalized, it was quiet. No yelling, no flying objects. Just papers on a table, the low hum of a ceiling fan, and Clarissa's carefully rehearsed expression of dignity and indifference. She wore a navy blue blouse I bought her 2 Christmases ago. Her hair was twisted back the way she always did when she wanted to appear composed. I didn't cry. Neither did she. She got the house. The nice one with the wraparound porch and the garden we built together on weekends. She took the car, too. Well, both of them technically, because the truck title was in her name. Most of the furniture followed her. So did the cookware. Even the dog chose to go with her. I guess we all pick our comforts in a storm. What did I get? 2 acres of dry, patchy land on the far edge of the Holloway family plot. Land that wasn't even considered valuable enough to fight over. No one in her camp batted an eye when the deed landed in my hands. Just some wild bramble, a rusting water pump, and a few broken fence posts. And yet, when I stepped onto that forgotten patch of soil with nothing but my boots and a backpack full of legal papers, I smiled. I actually smiled. See, Clarissa never understood the way the land speaks. Not really. She liked appearances, fresh-cut hedges, seasonal flowers, designer touches that made things Instagram-worthy. But me? I loved the smell of freshly turned earth, the stubbornness of roots, the satisfaction that came from hands dirty with something real, something earned. Back when we were still together, I'd go out there sometimes, just to think. I'd walk those 2 acres and imagine what they could be. She thought it was a waste of time. Nobody wants dusty vegetables from a glorified backyard, she once said, laughing as she scrolled through vacation rentals in Costa Rica. But I saw more than dust. I saw potential. I saw peace. So after she walked away, with her realtor smile and her new man already shadowing her steps, I walked towards something else. No revenge. No bitterness. Just the start of something my own. The first night was cold. I parked an old trailer near the edge of the woods, dragged a mattress inside, and lay there listening to wind brush against the broken trees. It wasn't glamorous. There were mice under the floorboards. The plumbing was sketchy. But it was mine. Every morning after that started with the same ritual. I'd wake before the sun, pull on my boots, and take a slow walk through the wild. I mapped out where the water ran shallow after a storm, where the sun hit hardest in the afternoon. I tested the soil with kits I ordered online, took notes like it was science class all over again. Funny thing is, when you stop trying to force things, they start to respond. The weeds didn't vanish overnight, but little by little, they made room. I planted rows of kale first because it's tough and forgiving. Then tomatoes, their vines messy but full of promise. I built raised beds from leftover lumber I pulled from the back of the Holloway barn. I found an old greenhouse frame on Craigslist and drove 3 hours to get it. Nobody saw any of it. Nobody cared. Clarissa had moved into the main house with Dean by then. He was taller than me, louder. The kind of guy who wears work boots to look rugged but hasn't lifted anything heavier than a wine fridge in 5 years. They started throwing parties. I'd hear the music from down the slope at night. Laughing, clinking glasses, fireworks sometimes. I didn't go anywhere near them. They had their version of winning. Let them keep it. Because in the silence of those 2 acres, something else was growing. There's a kind of healing that comes when your sweat waters the ground. When you put your back into something that answers back in green. I was no expert, but I learned. I watched videos. I listened to the older farmers at the market when I could afford to stop by. I burned through my savings, sure, but every dollar was a brick in the new foundation. Within 6 months, the land started changing. Kale that tasted like clean air. Squash the size of small dogs. Basil so fragrant that a local chef asked to tour my patch. I started calling it Holloway Grove not out of ego, but as a reminder, this was my beginning again. Clarissa must have noticed. The first time she came down to check the border, she acted surprised. "Oh, wow," she said, arms crossed as she scanned the rows. "Didn't think it would actually take." I said nothing, just wiped my hands on my jeans and nodded once. She smirked. "Well, as long as you're not spraying anything toxic. Wouldn't want it drifting onto our property." "Our." That word again. I just pointed to the sign I'd carved out of scrap wood near the gate. Private. Do not trespass. Simple. Firm. She gave Dean a report later, I'm sure. Because 2 days after that, I caught him standing near the broken fence post with a tape measure and a beer. He didn't say much. Just looked around like he was mentally redrawing lines. I stayed calm. Always calm. That was my power. Let them have the house. The car. The patio lights and champagne brunches. Let them win in the way they thought winning looked. Because the soil? The soil doesn't lie. It remembers who worked it. Who broke their back for it. Who planted when there was no rain. Who watered when there was no applause. I didn't walk away with much after the divorce. But I walked away with the land. And somehow, that was everything. There's a moment in every day, right before the sun rises, where everything feels still, like the world is holding its breath. That's when I'd open the trailer door, barefoot sometimes, step into the dew-covered grass, and just breathe. Those mornings were quiet, but not empty. Birds waking. Crickets fading out. The smell of damp soil and wood smoke from last night's fire. It was peaceful, and that peace, as modest as it was, became my compass. After Clarissa and I split, I didn't have much to fall back on. No trust fund. No second income. No friend group. Really, most had faded during the long silence of our failing marriage, and the rest politely took her side. She always was better at socializing. So, I did what I could with what I had. The trailer was old, but held up. I fixed leaks with tarps and elbow grease. When it rained, I'd sit by the window and plan. I drew out planting beds on scrap paper, calculating sun angles and crop rotations by watching YouTube tutorials on my phone. My charger was an old solar panel rigged to a car battery, something a neighbor had given me out of pity, or maybe respect. I called the place Holloway Grove. There wasn't a grove, not yet. No charming rows of trees or Instagram-ready setups. Just red dirt, scattered rocks, and one stubborn pecan tree that leaned like it was tired of holding up the sky. But I gave it that name anyway. A name makes a thing feel real, even when it's still a dream. I planted kale first because it doesn't complain. It grows in cold. It grows in rough soil. It forgives you for being inexperienced. Then came heirloom tomatoes, seeded from a farmer I met at a market in town. He liked my story. Said I reminded him of his younger days, chasing rain and hope in equal measure. He gave me a few starter plants for free and told me not to quit, no matter what came through that fence. That winter was brutal. I wrapped the tomatoes in old plastic sheeting and built makeshift trellises out of broomsticks and cut twine. Some died. Some fought. I did the same. I'd pick up odd jobs here and there, loading hay bales, helping rebuild a roof, clearing brush on a neighbor's lot. Anything to buy seeds, compost, or replacement tools. Every dollar went back into the soil. Every blister had a purpose. The locals started noticing. At first it was just curious glances when I showed up at the feed store. Then came nods. Then came questions. You're the guy with the trailer and the tomatoes, right? That's what they called me, trailer and tomatoes. Fine by me. One day a woman named Nadine approached me at the farmer's market. She owned a bistro downtown. Fancy place. Used words like seasonal, artisanal, and local sourced like they were ingredients. Your greens, she said, looking over my rough setup of mason jars and burlap crates, have actual flavor. Not like the hydroponic bags I've been ordering. She asked if I could supply her weekly. I said yes, though I had no idea if I could keep up. That night I stayed up until 3 a.m., calculating planting schedules, spacing, and how to speed up germination without expensive lights. The next morning, I built a cold frame using salvaged windows. And just like that, Holloway Grove became more than survival. It became work. Real work. Orders. Deliveries. Planting charts on the walls of the trailer. A second-hand fridge plugged into a jerry-rigged generator. A phone buzzing with restaurant texts and weekend pre-orders. It didn't happen overnight. And it didn't happen easily. There were days I wanted to quit. Like the day my irrigation pipe burst and flooded the whole south row. Or the day a raccoon figured out how to unlatch the compost bin and scattered 2 weeks of effort across the yard. Or when the trailer heater broke during a frost, and I spent the night bundled in 3 jackets, my breath fogging the air like I was camping in a meat freezer. But each time something broke, I built something stronger. And the land? The land gave back. Kale that didn't just survive but shimmered under the sun. Tomatoes that split open under their own weight. Basil that perfumed the air even in the cold. Squash that grew fat and heavy like it had something to prove. People started coming by. Not friends, just locals. They'd wave as they passed. Some would stop and ask about the soil, the seeds, the structure of the rows. Others brought coffee. One woman even baked me bread. I didn't ask for help, but somehow, help found its way in. That was the part Clarissa never understood. She always thought power was loud. Prestige, connections, bank accounts. But out here, power was quiet. It was patience, repetition, knowing when to dig and when to wait. And I was learning. Every so often, I'd see them. Clarissa and Dean, usually late afternoon, walking the fence line like they were checking a border. She never looked me in the eye. Dean would sometimes shout things I couldn't hear. I didn't shout back. I didn't need to, because every inch of green behind me, that was proof. I'd built something from ruin. Taken rock and stubborn clay and made it bloom. I remember one morning, I had just finished a row of herb beds and was rinsing off a trowel when I heard rustling. I turned and saw a little girl, maybe 8 or 9, standing by the gate. She held her mother's hand and stared wide-eyed at the plants. "Are these real?" she whispered. I smiled and nodded. Every single one. She reached out and touched a basil leaf, then grinned like she'd found treasure. They left a few minutes later with a bundle of herbs and a small squash I wrapped in brown paper. The mother handed me a crumpled $5 bill. I didn't want it, but she insisted. As they walked off, the girl turned and waved. "This place smells like pizza." I laughed harder than I had in months. That moment, that little girl's joy, her wonder, meant more than any furniture Clarissa took. More than the car. More than the house. Because out here in the dirt, I'd found something deeper than ownership. I'd found roots. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. Those little walks Clarissa and Dean started taking. You know the kind. Slow strolls, arms crossed, sunglasses on, their path just happening to trace the fence line between our properties. Sometimes they'd talk in hushed tones. Other times, I'd hear loud laughter at odd moments, like they were putting on a show for whoever might be watching me. It didn't bother me at first. Not really. I figured they were curious. Or bored. Maybe Dean wanted to size up what he thought was just some amateur patch of vegetables. Whatever the reason, I stayed focused on my work. The spring planting was going well. The tomatoes had survived the frost. Nadine had asked for a second weekly delivery. Even the local co-op had begun asking if I had enough surplus for a monthly produce box. But there was a shift I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, I caught Dean standing just inside my field, not near the fence, but a good 6 feet into my property. He was holding a beer in one hand, a measuring tape in the other. His boots were planted right in the middle of a row I had just sown with carrots. He didn't see me at first. I'd been hauling mulch from the side shed and came back around the long way. When I called out, he didn't even flinch. Just looked up slowly like I was the one intruding. "What's going on, Dean?" I asked, keeping my tone level. "Just checking something," he said, snapping the tape back into its case with a loud zing. Hard to tell where the real boundary is out here. It all kind of blurs together, doesn't it? "No," I said flatly. "It doesn't blur. It's marked and surveyed. Always has been." He smiled, tight, forced. "Just saying. You know how properties shift over time. Wind, erosion, animals. Hard to say what's technically yours after all these years." I didn't respond. Just pointed toward the gate. He gave me a mock salute and walked off, whistling some off-key tune like nothing had happened. That night, I dug out the survey maps again, laid them across the trailer table, double-checked the GPS coordinates I had stored on my phone. Everything was clear. The markers were solid. That fence wasn't just a suggestion, it was legal fact. But still, something in my gut told me this wasn't over. 2 days later, I got a text from Clarissa. "Hey. Just a heads up, we noticed some runoff near the rose beds on our side. Hope you're not using anything toxic." No greeting. No punctuation. Just that dry tone I knew too well. Not really a question. Definitely not friendly. I didn't respond immediately. I walked outside instead, scanned the slope, and found nothing out of place. My compost pile was sealed. The irrigation system was clean. The rain barrel hadn't overflowed. Still, just to be safe, I spent that weekend tightening every joint in the system, labeling everything, even putting up laminated signs that read, "Organic methods only. No chemical pesticides." It wasn't for me. It was for whatever game they were starting to play. The following week, I noticed something else. The fence gate on the north side was unlatched. It doesn't just swing open. There's a trick to lifting the latch. A certain way you have to jiggle it to get it loose. but it was hanging wide open. A section of mulch had been disturbed nearby, and a few seedling trays were flipped. Not ruined, but moved. I checked the trail cam I'd mounted to the gatepost last month. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Two silhouettes, about 11:30 p.m., creeping along the edge. One tall and broad, the other with a ponytail. Dean and Clarissa, no doubt in my mind. That's when I knew this wasn't about a garden. It wasn't about boundary lines or runoff or property confusion. It was about control, about power. Clarissa had always hated things she couldn't manage. When we were married, even the smallest things, like my messy toolbox or my half-finished basement projects, bothered her. She liked tidiness, predictability. Her way. Dean was no different. He didn't like that my work was starting to matter, that restaurants were praising it, that locals were talking about the farm boy down the hill, like I was building something worthwhile. So they started testing the edges. Little things, like turning their outdoor speakers toward my property and blasting music during harvest hours, or hosting loud brunches on Sunday mornings while I was packing crates. Once, I found one of their guests urinating against my fence, drunk and laughing with his phone out. I didn't react. Not how they expected. Instead, I installed more cameras. Got a second trail cam. Mounted one inside the greenhouse too, just in case. I documented everything. Dates, times, text messages, videos. I saved voice memos of comments they made near the property line. I even started logging every planting, every harvest, every repair with GPS tags and timestamps. That's when Silas Reed showed up. Silas was a retired vet who lived 2 plots down. He'd been raising bees for nearly a decade and sold his honey at the market next to my table. We weren't exactly close, but we exchanged nods and short words most weeks. That afternoon, he walked up my drive with a thermos in hand and a look that said this wasn't a social visit. "You got a minute?" he asked. "Sure," I said, wiping my hands on a towel. We sat on the steps outside the trailer. He poured coffee into 2 metal cups, offered one to me. "Dean's been asking around," he said after a long sip. "Wanted to know who surveyed your land, who laid your irrigation. Even asked me what kind of chemicals you used." I didn't say anything, just waited. "I told him to mind his damn business," Silas added. "But between you and me, that man's fishing for trouble. Doesn't like seeing something grow where he thought it would rot." That line stuck with me. I thanked him for the heads up and walked the property line twice that night. Just pacing, listening, thinking. I'd spent so long pouring my energy into the land, healing, growing, building, that I almost forgot the world didn't always respect quiet strength. Sometimes, people mistake your silence for weakness. But I wasn't weak. Not anymore. I had records, footage, facts. And unlike Dean and Clarissa, I didn't need noise to prove I was right. I just needed time and patience. The kind the land had taught me. Because if they wanted to push, I was ready. I didn't hear the bulldozer first. I felt it. There was this strange vibration under my boots, like the land itself was warning me, something's coming. I was in the greenhouse tying up vine lines, hands deep in the scent of warm tomato leaves, when the sensation hit me, a low, dull thrum that moved up through the soles of my feet, into my legs, and settled heavy in my chest. At first, I thought it might be thunder. We'd had dry weather all week, and a storm wouldn't have been unwelcome. But there was no wind, no clouds, just that strange, crawling tension in the air. Then my phone buzzed. Motion alert, Gate 1, front perimeter. I pulled it out, clicked the notification, and saw the live feed. Dean, shirtless, laughing, sitting behind the controls of a machine I didn't recognize at first, a rusted yellow bulldozer, belching smoke like a dragon. And behind him, arms crossed like she was supervising the demolition of an old shopping mall, stood Clarissa, cool as stone, wearing sunglasses and sandals, sipping what looked like iced tea. My breath caught. My hands curled into fists without thinking. I didn't say anything out loud. I just moved, dropped everything, ran. I didn't stop to lock the greenhouse. Didn't bother to switch off the irrigation. I flew down the path, gravel crunching under my boots, heart pounding faster with every second. The trailer blurred past me. The edge of the tree line blurred. My only focus was that engine, loud now. No longer just vibration, but thunder. Metal on soil. Rubber on dreams. When I crested the ridge, I saw it all. Dean was inside the machine, jerking the levers like it was a carnival ride. The blade of the bulldozer had already torn into the west side of my field, right where I had just planted a new batch of squash. Dozens of seedlings gone. Flattened. Pipe snapped. Water spraying into the air like a severed artery. He looked up, saw me, and grinned. This land belongs to me and my wife now. He shouted over the engine, voice hoarse with effort and arrogance. I didn't reply. Clarissa didn't even flinch. She just raised her phone, filming me, of course, like I was the spectacle. "This is what you get," she said, her tone flat. "You should have never fought the divorce." It hit me harder than I expected. Not the words, but the coldness behind them. Like none of the years we shared had mattered. Like all that time I spent building something real was just an inconvenience she was finally removing. I walked toward them, slow and steady, every step a fight to stay calm. The sound of the engine roared in my ears. Soil flew from the blade. Another row of beds was gone. A third collapsing. My heart was cracking, not from fear, but from fury. I raised my hand, signaling for Dean to stop. He didn't. He spun the machine instead, turning it hard into the irrigation trench. A geyser of muddy water erupted into the sky. He laughed like a teenager with fireworks. Clarissa tilted her phone sideways for a better angle. That's when I pulled out mine. I opened the security app and began downloading the footage directly to the cloud. 3 angles. One from the gate. One from the east camera. One from inside the greenhouse, which caught the whole thing from a distance, including Dean's face, clear as day, screaming his claim of ownership while crushing half a season's worth of work under steel treads. I called the police. Simple. Clear. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "This is Grant Holloway. I'm reporting a trespassing and property destruction in progress. Heavy machinery involved. Yes, I have footage. Yes, I'm safe for now." Clarissa turned, smirked again. "You really think the cops are going to care?" she said. "Dean's got friends. This is just a misunderstanding." I looked her in the eyes. "No, this is a crime." And then I said nothing else. I didn't yell, didn't plead, didn't demand. I just stood there and watched them unravel. The flashing lights arrived 8 minutes later. Longest 8 minutes of my life. I watched 2 years of work get dragged and broken. The basil beds, gone. The compost bins, cracked open and spilling. The fencing on the west side, torn like tissue paper. When the officers stepped out of the cruiser, I raised both hands and calmly walked to meet them. I showed them my ID, my land deed, which I had printed, laminated, and stored in my truck for emergencies. Then I showed them the footage. I didn't say much. Just let the video speak. Dean climbed out of the bulldozer, suddenly all smiles. "Hey, officers," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We were just working out some property confusion." One of the cops raised an eyebrow. "In a bulldozer?" he asked. Dean chuckled. "Hey, things happen. We thought," he screamed, "this land belonged to him while actively destroying crops," I said, holding up my phone. 3 different angles. "Want to see?" The officer nodded. Dean went pale when he saw himself on the screen. No more charm. No more swagger. Just sweat and silence. Clarissa, still filming, finally lowered her phone. "You're making a mistake," she said to the officers. "This is a domestic issue." "Ma'am," one officer replied, already pulling out zip ties. "This is felony property damage on private land with documented ownership and recorded evidence. That's not domestic. That's criminal." Dean started yelling then, about lawyers, connections, his rights. But it didn't matter. The cuffs clicked shut with a finality that felt biblical. Clarissa stared at him like the reality had just caught up. She didn't look at me. Not once. She just kept saying, "This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't supposed to go this far." I stood beside the wreckage and watched them take him away. Neighbors came out to see what the commotion was. Silas was among them, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The officers promised to follow up, take statements, secure the footage. When they were gone, and the property was quiet again, I walked back into the field. The damage was worse than I thought. Pipes bent, beds collapsed, dozens of plants shredded. A small oak I'd nurtured from a sapling torn at the roots. I knelt beside it, ran my fingers over the splinters. It was just a tree, but it had taken time to grow, just like me. I looked up at the setting sun, sky streaked in orange and red like the land was bleeding too. Then I stood, brushed the dirt from my palms, and whispered to no one, "You wanted war?" I glanced back at the trailer, already reaching for my phone again. Now you've got it. It had been 2 weeks since Dean was cuffed and carted off. 2 quiet, cautious weeks. Not peaceful, no, that word didn't fit anymore. But still, the tension that had been thick in the air around Holloway Grove had briefly pulled back, like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. I spent those days rebuilding what I could. Replaced the torn irrigation lines, resecured the fencing on the west side, and rerouted some beds to give the soil time to recover. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't fast, but progress never is. Silas dropped by twice, once with a jar of raw honey and once with a pair of old work gloves. He didn't say much, just nodded toward the fields and said, "Keep going." I took those words like medicine. Short, bitter, and necessary. The legal process had started moving too. I had filed a formal damage report with the county, and my lawyer, Amani Cross, was building a case strong enough to make a steel beam jealous. She was sharp and careful, didn't promise revenge, just truth. And that was enough for me. I thought we were past the worst of it. Then came the Saturday morning that proved I was wrong. I had just come back from Nadine's bistro, where I dropped off a bulk order of greens and fresh herbs. She was testing a new seasonal menu, and she'd asked for more edible flowers too, so I'd spent the entire week growing calendula and nasturtiums. The truck still smelled like mint and damp soil. When I parked, I noticed the gate on the north side was open again. Not just unlatched, wide open, hanging like someone had kicked it hard. I frowned and walked toward it. My boots crunched along the gravel. Something in the air felt off, like static before a storm. The birds weren't singing. The wind was sharp. Then my phone buzzed. Motion alert, Greenhouse East. Then another. Motion alert, Westfield. I pulled up the live feed. And what I saw stopped me cold. Dean. Dean was back. He was behind the controls of that same rusting bulldozer, even louder now, wheels chewing the earth like a starving animal. Shirtless again, of course, and wild-eyed, as if nothing had changed. Clarissa stood beside him, recording the whole thing on her phone, hair pulled back in that same tight bun she wore when she wanted to look serious. This wasn't a random outburst. This was planned. I dropped everything I was holding. A basket of rosemary clattered to the ground. I sprinted. My legs burned as I pushed over the hill, chest heaving with disbelief and fury. When I came over the ridge, I saw the full picture. Dean had already taken out the irrigation trench I'd repaired. A brand new section of basil beds was crumpled under the front blade. My youngest fruit trees, fig and peach, had been uprooted like they were nothing. The bulldozer's tracks dug deep into the earth, dragging chaos wherever it went. And Dean? He looked thrilled. Alive. Drunk on destruction. Clarissa spotted me first and raised her voice. This is what happens when you ignore boundaries, Grant. I didn't answer. I was too stunned. Dean slammed the gear stick and twisted the bulldozer again, turning it toward the greenhouse. Not just near it, toward it. My lungs clenched. I'd built that greenhouse myself. Frame by frame. Sheet by salvaged sheet. It held my best tomatoes, my experimental lettuces, and all the seedlings for the next market delivery. I bolted, shouting now. Dean. Stop the damn machine. He couldn't hear me, or pretended not to. The engine roared louder. Clarissa smirked. You should have sold the land when we asked. I reached for my phone with one hand while waving the other, screaming for him to stop. He didn't. The bulldozer's blades scraped the side of the greenhouse, shattering the plastic sheeting, tearing into the frame, popping support bolts like knuckles cracking. The whole thing shuddered, groaned, and then gave way. The top half collapsed in on itself. Steel bent. Wood snapped. Glass fell in fat, sharp tears. Inside, trays of young sprouts, cabbage, onion, herbs, were buried beneath debris and dust. My heart twisted with every sound. Dean finally cut the engine, hopping down like he'd just won a trophy. He dusted his hands. That's done, he said. I stood there, barely able to speak. My mind couldn't catch up to what I'd just seen. What had just been taken from me? You're going to jail, I finally managed to say, voice trembling. He laughed. I already posted bond from the first stunt. I'll do it again. Ain't nothing permanent. Clarissa stepped forward, eyes cold. You should have taken the deal when Dean offered to buy you out. I didn't know I was part of a sale, I snapped. And this land's not for sale. It never was. She tilted her head. Then why are you so surprised it's being claimed? That did it. I turned, raised my phone, and called the police again. Same location, I said. He's back. The damage is worse. Greenhouse destroyed. Trees gone. I have everything on camera again. I pointed up. The drone I had launched days ago was still hovering overhead, capturing it all in 4K. Dean didn't even notice. Clarissa finally looked up when I nodded at it, and that's when her face changed. She'd miscalculated. The officers arrived faster this time. Maybe because of the earlier report. Maybe because the dispatcher recognized my voice. Either way, they didn't ask many questions. They watched the drone feed. They watched the footage from the trail cams. They walked to the collapsed greenhouse and inspected the damage themselves. Dean tried the just a misunderstanding routine again. Clarissa tried the documented property overlap excuse. They said it with the tone of people who were used to bluffing their way through trouble. But this time, no one bought it. One officer looked Dean in the eye and said, "Sir, you've committed felony vandalism on private property. You destroyed a functioning agricultural structure." Dean shrugged. "It's just some plants." My blood boiled. "Those plants feed 3 restaurants," I said. "They're also my livelihood. You destroyed months of work. You trespassed." Again, the officers turned to Clarissa next. "Ma'am, were you aware your husband was operating heavy equipment on land you do not own?" She hesitated. That pause was everything. Then, with that fake calm voice, she said, "I was only observing." "You filmed it," I said. "You encouraged it. You were here last time too. And I have your texts." The cuffs came out again. Dean swore, claimed harassment. Clarissa's hands shook as they bound her wrists, but she still tried to look composed. The officers took them both this time. Clarissa glanced over her shoulder as she was led away. "You'll regret this." I didn't reply. Just turned back toward the rubble, toward the ruin they'd left behind. I walked into the greenhouse, crunching over broken trays and wet soil. I picked up a bent pipe, ran my hand along a torn piece of plastic that used to hold heat and promise. Then I took a deep breath and started filming. I filmed everything: damage, angles, evidence. Because this time they wouldn't just walk away. I used to think justice looked like a loud courtroom. Slammed gavels, raised voices, confessions made under pressure. But standing in the middle of what used to be my greenhouse, I realized something else. Justice starts quiet. It starts with evidence. That night after Dean and Clarissa were arrested, again, I didn't sleep. Not because of fear or even grief. I didn't have time for either. I spent the entire night backing up footage. Drone angles, greenhouse cameras, trail cams, phone recordings, even the dash cam from my truck that caught Dean shouting as I pulled in. I labeled every file, timestamped every folder. Then I called Amani. She picked up on the second ring. Calm, alert, even though it was just past 2 a.m. "They came back," I said. She didn't ask for details. Just said, "I'm on my way at 8. Don't touch anything else." By sunrise, I had 4 external hard drives ready. My printer was still chugging through screenshots, Clarissa's face mid-smirk, Dean gripping the bulldozer wheel, the moment the greenhouse frame gave way. When Amani arrived, she didn't waste a minute. No small talk, no pleasantries. She walked the property like a forensic scientist, her shoes crunching over glass and wet soil. She took her own photos, recorded commentary as she moved. Greenhouse structure, visibly collapsed from impact. Fresh soil disturbance. Blade markings match bulldozer treads from previous footage. Second incident, 36 hours after bond release. She moved like someone who'd been here before, maybe not my story, but others like it. People dismissed. People who lost everything while the world called it a misunderstanding. When she finished, she stood under what used to be the entrance to the greenhouse, pulled off her gloves, and looked me dead in the eyes. "They thought you'd stay quiet again," she said. I nodded. "They always do." "Well," she replied, "not anymore. We filed everything that afternoon. Property damage, trespassing, malicious destruction of agricultural assets, violation of protective boundary notices, and harassment. This wasn't a civil matter anymore. It was a criminal case. And it was airtight. Clarissa's text messages didn't help her. The ones accusing me of getting what I deserved or warning me to hand over the land before it got messy. They were time-stamped and clear. Dean's voice on video? Even clearer. "This land belongs to me and my wife now," he had yelled, seconds before slamming the blade into my irrigation line. Imani included everything, not just to prove the crime, but to show the pattern. She built a timeline. Emails, cease and desist letters I had sent, footage from the first incident, photos of damage, statements from neighbors, including Silas, who gave a written account of Dean asking, how hard it would be to level a garden. When I read the draft of the case file, it felt like watching my life, my pain, laid out in neat, numbered folders. No emotions. No dramatic music. Just facts. And the facts were louder than any threat Dean had ever made. Still, Clarissa tried. 2 days before the court date, I got a message from an unknown number. It was her. "Grant, let's talk. Just us. No lawyers. We can work something out." I didn't answer. An hour later, she left a voicemail. "You don't have to go through with this. This isn't how we used to be. We were better than this. Don't let her, Imani, turn you into someone cold." Cold. I sat in silence for a moment, the phone still in my hand, listening to her voice fade into static. Cold was what she gave me every time she walked my fence line with that look in her eyes. Cold was standing beside Dean while he destroyed what I'd spent years growing. Cold was smiling into her camera while my greenhouse crumbled behind her. I deleted the voicemail. I didn't need warmth from someone who only knew how to burn. Court came faster than I expected. The hearing was set in a modest county courtroom. Wooden benches. Fluorescent lights. A judge with reading glasses and a voice like sandpaper. Dean and Clarissa walked in like they were headed to brunch. Dean in a rumpled suit jacket, Clarissa in a white blouse that tried too hard to look innocent. Their lawyer looked confident at first until Imani stood up. Imani didn't raise her voice. She didn't use dramatic pauses or pound her fist on the table. She spoke like the evidence spoke for her, because it did. She projected the footage onto the courtroom screen. Dean, on camera, behind the controls. Clarissa filming. The bulldozer roaring. The greenhouse falling. There was no sound in the room except the video playing. Then came the drone footage. High angles, time-stamped, showing the destruction in wide, brutal clarity. Then the emails. Then the texts. Imani laid it all out like she was planting rows in a perfect field, methodical, calm, patient. When it was their turn, Clarissa's lawyer tried to argue emotional distress. That I was withholding land out of spite. That Clarissa had assumed shared marital property extended to adjacent sections. Imani pulled out the deed. Dated 3 years before the marriage. Filed and notarized. Was this land purchased before the marriage? The judge asked me directly. Yes, sir. All 2 acres. Bought it with my savings after my father passed. It was his final gift. Dean tried to speak. It was never about revenge. I just thought, Mr. Marrow, the judge cut in, you operated industrial equipment on land that does not belong to you. You caused tens of thousands in agricultural losses. This is not a thought issue. It's a law issue. Clarissa's eyes flickered. Her mouth opened, but she said nothing. The ruling came down with quiet finality. Dean, guilty of felony property destruction. Ordered to pay $85,000 in damages. Clarissa, fined for civil harassment and given a court-ordered restraining boundary from my property. When the gavel dropped, I didn't cheer. I didn't pump my fist or smile. I just breathed. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled without weight on my chest. Outside the courthouse, Silas was waiting. He handed me a brown paper bag with something warm inside. I opened it, cornbread. Still steaming. Looks like your soil ain't the only thing growing, he said. I chuckled. Feels like I've been living in a war zone. He nodded, his voice quiet. Sometimes you gotta fight to protect what's growing. I walked back to the truck, parked beneath a row of dusty oaks. The breeze was soft. The sky above was wide and cloudless. I sat in the cab, turned the key, and let the engine hum beneath me. No music. No noise. Just the sound of justice. It wasn't loud. It didn't scream. But it was real. And it was mine. After the ruling, people thought it was over. That I'd won. That I could finally breathe, let the dust settle, and go back to growing things in peace. But battles don't end just because a judge says so. They end when the people who started them finally run out of ways to harm you. And as I was quickly learning, Clarissa and Dean weren't interested in closure. They were interested in control. Even now, even after losing in court. The land was mine, yes. The law confirmed that. But their obsession? That didn't go away with the ruling. 2 weeks after the verdict, I got a call from a county inspector. He said a complaint had been filed against Holloway Grove. Multiple complaints, actually. Water misuse, zoning violations, improper use of organic labeling, even animal noise, though I didn't own a single goat or chicken. I listened, jaw tight, while he read down the list. These claims seem excessive, he admitted, almost apologetic. but I still have to come by and inspect. We're required to follow up. I agreed. Of course I did. I had nothing to hide. He showed up 2 days later, clipboard in hand. Walked the rows with me, checked the compost system, took photos of my signage, even opened a few seedling trays. When he finished, he looked around at the soil, the restored greenhouse frame, the quiet trail of bees working the squash flowers. Well, he said, flipping his notes closed, you're cleaner than most commercial lots I've seen. I'm marking it all compliant. Thank you, I said, but I already knew who was behind it. Clarissa and Dean couldn't win in the courtroom, so they turned to paperwork warfare. False reports, whisper campaigns. A neighbor down the road told me they'd seen Dean handing out flyers at the diner claiming my produce wasn't safe. Clarissa went on social media, posting old photos of our home garden from back when we were married, claiming that was Holloway Grove, that she had started it all. I didn't respond. Not online, not publicly, but Imani did. She filed a cease and desist the same day the inspector left, then another, then a formal complaint with the local zoning board about harassment through false reports. That's when we stumbled across the thing that changed everything. Imani had hired an assistant, a sharp young woman named Fallon who was helping gather public documents, just in case Clarissa and Dean tried to countersue. She found something while digging through permit records, a meeting request filed under Dean's name with a local developer. The file was buried, stamped 6 months before Dean ever stepped foot on my land. The developer's name? J. Talcott Real Estate Holdings, a known group in the region. They specialized in luxury rentals. Tiny homes for high-income clients, marketed as getaway cabins. Think reclaimed wood, designer sinks, solar panels, and $500 a night. According to the meeting notes, Dean had pitched the idea of a private rental farm experience on 2 acres of land. My land. He had printed maps, hand-drawn cabin placements, even water access plans. Fallon forwarded the scanned documents. My property was circled in red ink. Dean had even labeled the fields unoccupied, claiming they were in used family land that would soon transition under his control. That was months before the bulldozer. That's when the real picture formed. This had never been about a grudge. This was a land grab. Dean and Clarissa hadn't wanted the farm because of emotional ties or leftover bitterness. They saw it as an investment, a business deal. My soil was their opportunity. Imani stared at the documents for a long minute, then looked at me. We're not just talking damages anymore, she said. This is fraud. It's malicious intent. And if the developer's willing to cooperate, we've got proof of conspiracy. I should have felt angry, but what I felt instead was clarity. Every visit to the fence line, every text about shared property, every sneer, every whisper, every step onto my land, they were calculated. They'd seen Holloway Grove growing, and instead of seeing beauty, they saw profit. The next morning, I drove into town to meet with the developer. The man who greeted me, Talcott's project coordinator, wasn't surprised to see me. I figured someone would show up eventually, he said, offering me coffee I didn't take. Dean's plans were ambitious, but we couldn't move forward without clear title rights. So why did you meet with him at all? I asked. He shrugged. He brought a lot of charm. Talked about revitalizing old farmland, bringing in ecotourism. Said he and his wife were taking back property that had been neglected. Sounded like a passionate reclaiming project. I slid the drone footage across the table. He watched Dean destroy my greenhouse with his own hands. I didn't speak. I just watched his face go pale. By the end, he leaned back and let out a breath. Well, that's not the pitch he gave us. We had him sign a witness statement. He turned over his meeting notes. Clarissa's name was scribbled in the margin of one page, next to a line that read, "Market her as the sustainable founder." That broke me, just a little. She had been planning to steal my work and paint it with her face. My roots, her branding. Imani filed the new documents that week. And I kept farming, kept waking at dawn, kept rebuilding what had been torn, kept walking the rows, hand-weeding, checking moisture, whispering to seeds like they were old friends who'd stayed. Neighbors came more often now. Some brought tools. Others brought trays of starters, lavender, beans, marigold. One woman dropped off a hand-painted sign that said, "Grow strong, Holloway." Even Nadine stopped by with 2 of her chefs. "This is where it all starts, huh?" One of them said, crouching beside a patch of herbs. "Right here," I said, pressing my palm to the dirt. They looked around like tourists seeing something sacred. I didn't correct them, because it was sacred, not just the food, not just the field, but the fight. They had started a battle thinking I would fold. But what they didn't understand was this: you don't bury a man who knows how to grow. There's a kind of silence that fills a courtroom. Not empty, not quiet. It hums, like tension wrapped in wood and paper, like every breath is holding on to the next sentence. That's what it felt like when I walked through those double doors. Second hearing. This time, not just about damage. This time, it was personal and public. Clarissa and Dean had crossed a line. They weren't just vandals now. They were schemers. They tried to take what they didn't grow and call it theirs. That was the story now. That was the truth. Imani walked in beside me, calm as always, clutching her case files like she was holding lightning. She didn't fidget, didn't blink more than she had to. Her heels clicked like punctuation on polished tile. People turned when she passed, not because she was loud, but because she carried something they couldn't name, only respect. Dean and Clarissa were already seated across the room, their lawyer between them. I could tell just from the way he shifted that he knew they were in trouble. He kept his hands folded tight, tapping a pen against the table like he was keeping time in a funeral song. Dean wore another one of those wrinkled jackets, this time pretending to be a businessman. Clarissa wore white again. Same shade as last time. Not innocent white. More like the kind worn at political events. The kind that says, I want control back. They didn't look at me when I entered. Not once. Good. The judge took her seat. Older woman. Eyes like stone. She looked over the files, her brow tightening just slightly. And then we began. Imani started with the footage. Again. Only this time, she didn't just show what they did. She showed why. Your Honor, she said, voice steady. We are not here today simply because my client's greenhouse was destroyed. We're not here because of boundary disputes or personal conflict. We're here because two individuals engaged in a calculated effort to undermine and steal land they did not own, land they saw not as a home, but as profit. She let that hang. Then came the documents. Meeting notes with the developer. Emails confirming Dean's pitch to turn Holloway Grove into a luxury rental site. The sketches, the maps, the photos Dean had submitted without owning a single inch of the soil he promised. Clarissa's name in the margins. Her initials on a planning board. Her email follow-ups asking if guests would be allowed to harvest produce for authenticity. They had planned everything, months in advance, even while pretending they were simply watching a fence line or checking runoff. Dean shifted in his chair. Clarissa didn't move. Imani projected the footage from the drone again. The courtroom screen lit up with the image of Dean, sweaty and wild, yelling his now infamous line. This land belongs to me and my wife now. She played it twice. The judge asked for it a third time. Then came my part. Imani called me to the stand. I sat down, heart steady, hands still. She asked simple questions. When did you purchase the land? 3 years before our marriage. Was it ever listed as marital property? No. Did you receive any contribution, financial or labor, from the defendants in developing Holloway Grove? No. Neither ever assisted or offered. Were you ever approached by the defendants regarding a business arrangement involving your land? Never. Not until after the success began. Then she handed me a paper. It was a printout of Dean's cabin sketches. Do you recognize this? I nodded. Yes. That's my field. And did you approve this plan? No. I only saw it after it was submitted to a third-party developer. Imani turned back to the judge. No further questions. Dean's lawyer stood up, clearing his throat like he had something clever to say. He didn't. He tried to turn it into a misunderstanding. He claimed Dean believed the land was unclaimed because it wasn't properly fenced. He tried to blame the overlapping memories from their marriage. He even said, with a straight face, that they were motivated by a love of nature and that Dean simply got carried away in restoring a lost opportunity. Imani stood up again. Your Honor, they didn't restore anything. They bulldozed it. She pulled up side-by-side images. One of Holloway Grove before the incident, lush with rows of kale and tomatoes, and one after, mud, scrapwood, wreckage. Clarissa finally spoke. It wasn't planned. She blurted it during the third round of questioning. We didn't think he'd do anything with it. He was living in a trailer, for God's sake. The courtroom went still. Dean turned his head slowly toward her, eyes wide. Imani didn't react. She just tilted her head. So you believe the land wasn't valuable because of how he lived? Clarissa tried to backpedal. I mean, it wasn't developed. Until it was, Imani replied. And then you tried to steal it. Dean looked like he wanted to crawl into the floor. The judge was already writing something on her pad. 10 minutes later, the verdict came. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Full ownership reaffirmed. No more claims could be filed. A permanent restraining order was placed on both Dean and Clarissa, barring them from the property or its perimeter. And then the final blow. The court found that Dean and Clarissa had intentionally misrepresented land ownership in pursuit of financial gain. Their plan was labeled fraudulent misappropriation. They were ordered to pay an additional $45,000 in restitution and were banned from applying for any development permits in the county for 3 years. Dean muttered something under his breath. The judge didn't even ask what it was. Just banged the gavel and stood. It was over. I didn't cheer. I didn't grin. I just sat there and felt the stillness. The weight leaving my chest. The long, hard breath I finally let go. As the courtroom emptied, I saw Clarissa look back once. Just once. Not with anger. Not even with hate. But with something far worse. Emptiness. Like she'd gambled everything on this plan, and now she had nothing but dust in her hands. Imani walked beside me through the doors and said, "Sometimes we don't win with emotion. We win with preparation." I nodded. "Thank you. You did the hard part," she replied. "You grew something honest." All I did was prove it. When I got back to Holloway Grove that night, the moon was low, and the fields shimmered with dew. I walked the rows, touched the leaves, whispered to the soil. They had tried to bury me, but all they did was give me a reason to grow deeper. When the gavel dropped and the judge confirmed full ownership in my name, no appeals, no more tricks, I should have felt triumphant. But I didn't. I walked out of that courthouse not as a man who won, but as a man who had survived something he never wanted to fight in the first place. There was no adrenaline left, no secret smile or slow-motion movie scene where I punched the air. Just stillness. Just a strange, quiet kind of emptiness. The kind that follows storms. I think that's what nobody really tells you about victory. It doesn't come wrapped in celebration. It comes with the silence after, when everyone else goes home and you're left looking over the battlefield alone. Clarissa didn't even make eye contact as I walked past her in the corridor. Her lawyer had already stepped away, leaving her standing there with a blank expression. Her eyes were dry, but something in them had dimmed. Not regret, not guilt, just the brittle realization that her story had ended, and not on her terms. Dean wasn't any better. He sat on the bench near the exit, hunched forward like he'd been knocked out without a punch. His mouth hung open slightly, still trying to form excuses no one wanted to hear. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, but realer. Like for the first time in months, I could feel the shape of things around me again. The breeze moved through my shirt. The sun warmed the top of my neck. My boots pressed into solid ground. I wasn't looking for revenge. That was never the goal. I just wanted what was mine to be left alone. I wanted to plan in peace, to watch things grow without someone constantly trying to tear them down. Silas was leaning on his truck when I got back to the Grove. He didn't ask how court went. He didn't need to. The way I walked, the way I didn't slump, he saw it all. He handed me a folded sheet of paper. "What's this?" I asked. "A favor I called in," he said. "State grant program for small farms. They're piloting something for land recovery after legal disputes. You qualify now." I opened the paper. It was real. Not a handout. Not pity. Just opportunity earned the hard way. "I don't know what to say." Silas shrugged. "Just say yes before the deadline next week." Then he nodded to the fields. "You gonna plant again?" I looked out across the rows. Some beds were bare, still scarred from the bulldozer. Others had bounced back, green and soft, defiant. The greenhouse frame was halfway restored, the roof yet to be replaced. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think I am." He gave me a tired smile. "Told you. The soil remembers who tends it." After he left, I stood by the gate for a long time. The wind shifted. Somewhere behind the barn, bees hummed low in the rosemary. I walked the perimeter, slowly, my boots pressing deep into the soft earth. I passed the old oak that marked the western edge of the property. When we were married, Clarissa used to hate that tree. Said it was crooked, taking up too much space. I always thought it was strong. Bent by storms, yes, but still standing. Still rooted. That day, I finally understood it. The next morning, I got to work. No ceremony. No music playing. Just me, gloves on, hands in the soil. I pulled the ruined squash vines, replanted fresh kale, fixed what I could of the trellis system. For a while, I lost myself in the rhythm. Dig, water, tie, repeat. At noon, a delivery van pulled up. It was Nadine's driver. He stepped out with a small wooden box wrapped in brown paper. From the chef, he said. Congratulations. I opened it after he left. Inside was a note. You don't just grow food. You grow resilience. We'd be honored to keep sourcing from you. And more. Below that, she'd attached a contract offer. Exclusive supplier for her second location opening downtown. Better terms. Monthly standing order. Space to feature Holloway Grove on the menu, by name. I sat down right there in the dirt and laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it felt just. Not revenge. Not payback. Just something real blooming from ruin. That afternoon, I started getting calls. A reporter from a local blog wanted to interview me. Farmer defends his land in court was already spreading. Someone from a farming cooperative emailed asking if I'd consider speaking at their next event. A professor from the community college wanted to bring students out to see the land. It all felt surreal. And yet, none of it felt like validation. Because I wasn't waiting for applause. I was waiting for the silence to settle again. That's what I'd missed most. Peace. Later that evening, I got a knock on the trailer door. I opened it slowly. It was Clarissa, alone. She stood on the porch, arms crossed, but not with that same old edge. She looked smaller somehow, like the wind had gotten in and deflated the show. Can I come in? She asked. No, I said. But you can say what you came to say. She hesitated, then looked around at the field, the half-rebuilt greenhouse, the rows starting to push green again. You really made it work. I said nothing. I didn't think you would, she admitted. I thought, maybe you'd give up. I nodded. I know. She looked down, then back at me. Do you hate me? I blinked once. No, but I don't respect you either. She didn't argue. She just stood there in the quiet. I'm leaving, she said finally. Dean and I, it's not going to last. It was built on. Well, you know what it was built on. I nodded again. Yeah, sand. A long silence passed. Then she added, I never understood why you were so quiet. Why you didn't fight louder. Because I don't need to yell when I'm telling the truth. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but she didn't. She just turned and walked away. And I let her go. That night, I sat under the stars, a cup of coffee warming my palms, the grove silent except for wind in the trees. There was no music, no cheers, just me, and peace, and the sound of soil remembering every step. It started with a shovel. A new one, fresh metal, smooth wood, no splinters. I bought it from a hardware store on the other side of town, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to start this chapter with something untouched, something that hadn't seen destruction or been pulled from wreckage. It had been 2 months since the last court ruling. 2 months since Clarissa walked off my porch, and Dean's name stopped echoing through paperwork and voicemail threats. Since then, things had been quiet, but not still. Holloway Grove was waking up again. I'd repaired the greenhouse fully by now, rebuilt every beam, reinstalled the roof panel by panel. I didn't rush it. I treated it like something sacred. Each screw, each bolt, was placed with patience. I even added small hooks along the interior frame to hang string lights, the kind that glow soft and amber at night. A small touch, but it meant something. It meant peace. Neighbors started coming around more. Not because of gossip anymore, but because they wanted to help. One Saturday, Silas brought his nephew to lay mulch. A week later, a local teacher showed up with 3 high school students who wanted to volunteer for school credit. They didn't say much, just followed instructions, worked hard, and asked good questions. Why do you plant the basil near the tomatoes? Why are the beds curved instead of straight rows? How did you know where to start after it got destroyed? That last one stopped me. I looked at the boy who asked and said, I didn't. I just knew I wasn't done yet. That seemed to land. He nodded once and went back to work. People started treating the Grove like more than a farm. Like a place. Like a story they wanted to be part of. Nadine's second restaurant opened with a soft launch. She invited me, but I politely declined. Instead, I sent a small crate of produce wrapped in linen and a note from the soil that stood. She texted back later, every guest is asking where the flavor comes from. I just point to the menu, Holloway Grove. By the end of the month, I had more orders than I could fill. It wasn't overwhelming. just steady. Enough to keep me tired in a good way. The kind of tired that earns its rest. And speaking of rest, I finally got some. The kind of sleep that doesn't end in a startle. The kind where you don't hear phantom engines in your dreams or replay court arguments behind closed eyelids. I'd wake before dawn, not out of dread, but routine. My body remembered the rhythm now. My mind had room to breathe. I started journaling again, too. At first, it was just scribbles, crop dates, weather notes. Then full entries. Then sketches. Then letters I never sent. One I wrote to my father, thanking him for teaching me how to fix things that others throw away. One I wrote to the land. It went like this: thank you for not giving up on me, even when I nearly gave up on myself. Thank you for growing things when everything else tried to break them. I know now. You were never just soil. You were memory. You were promise. And I promise you this. I will protect you. I will honor what we built. There were still scars. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Some parts of the field still showed signs of the bulldozer's path. The soil there is stubborn, slower to accept seeds. Some plants don't root as easily. I don't force them. I plant wildflowers in those spots. Let the bees dance and the wind choose what stays. Because not every wound needs to be hidden. Some just need room to breathe. The local farming collective asked me to speak at their fall gathering. I almost said no, but Imani encouraged me. Sometimes, people need to hear that quiet men can win too, she said. So I stood under a white tent that October, the breeze lifting the edges, the air full of hay and fresh bread and cedar. I told my story. Not all of it. Just enough. I told them how I started with 2 acres and a broken heart. How I lost a house, but gained a home. How the land doesn't care about court rulings. It only cares about who stays. People clapped. A few shook my hand. One older woman with silver braids pressed a jar of apple butter into my hands and whispered, "My grandfather lost his farm to greed. Yours gives me hope again." When I got back that night, I placed her jar on the shelf next to my journal and the original deed, now framed. Then I made a new sign, carved it from salvage wood, burned the letters in by hand. Took me 3 nights. When it was done, I hung it at the gate. Holloway Grove grown by peace. Defended with fire. Some folks might find it dramatic, but I don't care, because that's the truth. This place was built on stillness, but it survived because I didn't back down when the fire came. I wasn't born a fighter, but I became one to protect what was rooted in me. And as winter came and the frost returned to the morning ground, I didn't feel fear. I felt ready, ready to rest, ready to plant again, ready to welcome whatever came next on my land, on my terms. Because the grove had grown, so had I.